Chapter 4, the Mauryan Empire. So in this chapter we will study regarding the sources and the administration as well as administration of the Mauryan Empire and Ashoka's Dhamma. So we will study all these things in details. The Mauryas. The Mauryan Empire was founded in the 4th century BC by Chandragupta Maurya. He organized a powerful army and laid the foundation of a vast empire. So Mauryan Empire was established by Chandragupta Maurya in 4th century BC, and he established it by laying down the foundation of a very vast empire. He overthrew the Nandas from Magad and the Greek satraps from the northwest frontier and unified a large part of the Indian subcontinent under his centralized government. So he overcame all these difficulties. What were the difficulties? The Nandas were ruling Magad before the establishment of Mauryan Empire. So Chandragupta Maurya overthrew the Nandas from Magad, as well as he overthrew the Greek satraps from the northwest frontier, that is northwest borders. And then he unified the entire all the large parts of the Indian subcontinent under one centralized government. He brought all the parts of the Indian subcontinent under one centralized government. His successor Bindusara kept the Mauryan Empire intact and further extended its boundaries. So similar thing was followed by his successor also, who was Bindusara, and he also kept the Mauryan Empire intact, and he further extended the boundaries of Mauryan Empire. The reign of Bindusara's son Ashoka constitutes one of the brightest periods in the Indian history. After the Kalinga War, Ashoka devoted his life to human welfare. So, after this Kalinga War, Ashoka completely changed his way of life. He gave up war and he devoted his entire life to human welfare. He considered his subjects as his children. He built many marvels in art and architecture. So after giving up war, he started to divert his attention towards human welfare, such as he built many marvels in art and architecture, some of which have survived up to this day. So now we will study regarding the sources. So first is the literary sources. Under literary sources, Arthashastra of Kautilya and Indica, these are the two most important literary sources of Mauryan Empire. Of all the literary sources on the history of the Mauryas, the most important source is Arthashastra, written by Kautilya, also known as Vishnugupta and Chanakya. So Arthashastra is a book actually, and it was written by Kautilya. Kautilya was also known as Vishnugupta and Chanakya. He was the advisor and prime minister of Chandragupta. So he was one of the advisor and prime minister of Chandragupta, and he was the important person who helped Chandragupta Maurya in laying down the foundation of the Mauryan Empire. Arthashastra is written in Sanskrit. It is a comprehensive manual that deals with politics. So these are the subjects or these are the topics included in Arthashastra. So Arthashastra deals with politics, rules of diplomacy, how the administration has to be done or how the administration has to be carried on, principles of administration, and other such political topics were covered in Arthashastra. This book was discovered in 1909 and its English translation is now available. The next literary source of the Mauryan Empire is Indica. So Indica was written by Megasthenes. Megasthenes was the Greek ambassador at the court of Chandragupta Maurya. He had been sent to the court by Seleucus. So Megasthenes was a Greek ambassador who was sent to the court of Chandragupta Maurya by Seleucus. Seleucus was a Greek ruler. He wrote a book named Indica, which contains his impressions of what he heard and saw during his stay in India. So when he stayed in the court of Chandragupta Maurya, when Megasthenes stayed in the court of Chandragupta Maurya, what he observed in India, what he heard of all these things, he recorded in his book. That book is named as Indica. Megasthenes' original Indica has been lost, but its fragments still survive. Fragments means its pieces still survive in the writings of later Greek authors like Strabo, Arrian, and Diodorus. So these are the Greek authors for which these pieces of Indica still survives, though the original Indica is lost. The next we will come to the archaeological sources. So under archaeological sources, again there are two sources, that is the edicts of Ashoka and the Sanchi Stupa. So these are the two archaeological sources of Mauryan Empire. So what are these edicts of Ashoka? An edict is a decree issued by a sovereign. Decree is an order that is issued by a sovereign or the ruler. The edicts of Ashoka form the most important source of Mauryan history. They are the oldest, best preserved and precisely dated records of India. So here we can see the picture of Ashokan edict. So these edicts are the oldest, best preserved edicts, as well as they are dated very precisely. These edicts are inscribed on rocks and pillars. So these edicts are not written in any kind of paper or books, but they are inscribed on these rocks and pillars. This kind of rocks they are inscribed on throughout the country and include 14 major rock edicts. So there are total 14 major rock edicts, 7 pillar edicts, and a number of minor rock edicts. The inscriptions on these edicts provide, so these are the this is the significance of these edicts. These edicts, they provide a useful insight into the life and ideals of Ashoka in particular, and about the history of the Mauryas in general. So if we read these edicts, we will get an idea about the life of Ashoka, as well as we will get an idea about the history of the Mauryan Empire. The most important event of Ashoka's reign was the conquest of Kalinga. That was the Kalinga War. That was the turning event in Ashoka's life. The indescribable sufferings and atrocities of the Kalinga War deeply touched Ashoka's conscience, and he made a solemn resolve not to take up arms anymore. So how it changed, how Kalinga War changed Ashoka's life. The Kalinga War was so much full of suffering and atrocities that then onwards Ashoka decided, he took the pledge that he will never take up arms anymore, means he will not do war anymore. And so he changed his policy from war drum, that is Bherigosha, to he changed his war drum from Bherigosha to the policy of peace, that is Dhammaghosha, that means non-violence and universal peace. So before that his policy was war drum Bherigosha, that is conquering all directions, and after Kalinga War he changed his policy to Dhammaghosha, that is non-violence and universal peace. So in this way Ashoka's life changed after Kalinga War. In pursuance of his policy of non-violence, Ashoka prohibited killing of animals. So here we studied that his policy changed to Dhammaghosha, that is non-violence. So to pursue his policy of non-violence, he prohibited killing of animals in his kingdom for sacrifices, advocated restraint in the number that had to be killed for consumption. If animals had to be killed for consumption, the number was limited, protected some of the animals, and in general condemned cruel acts against animals. He also rejected that there should not be any kind of cruel acts against animals. Reference to protection of animals is made in the Rock Edict 1, which states, so how do we know that there was the reference of protection to animals? There was reference to non-violence from this Rock Edict 1. There was an extract on this Rock Edict 1 which states that in Ashoka's empire animals were protected. So what was written? Formerly in the great refectory and temple of the heaven beloved King Piyadashi. King Piyadashi was referred to Ashoka. Ashoka was also called King Piyadashi. Daily were many 100,000 animals sacrificed for the sake of meat food. So this was before the Kalinga War, where hundreds and thousands of animals were sacrificed for consumption. So even at this day, while this religious edict is under promulgation, from the sacrifice of animals for the sake of food, some 2 are killed or 1 is killed. So from hundreds to thousands, it was reduced to either 1 or 2 was killed for consumption. But now the joyful chorus resounds again and again that henceforward not a single animal shall be put to death. But after that this number reduced to further, and now what was done, not a single animal was put to death. So from this extract we come to know that Ashoka protected the animals. Ashoka strictly followed his policy of non-violence, or strictly followed his policy of Dhammaghosha. The next archaeological source is Sanchi Stupa. We can see the picture over here. This is Sanchi Stupa, one of the most important archaeological source of the Mauryan Empire. So what is the stupa? The stupa is semi-spherical solid dome-like structure made of unburnt bricks and stones. So this stupa we can see here, this is a solid dome-like structure, semicircle structure, and it was made up of unburnt bricks and stones. The Buddhist stupa has been significant it represents the spiritual body of Buddha. So these stupas are very significant, are very important, because it contains the relics of Lord Buddha, relics such as hair, teeth or bones. So these were the parts of the body of Lord Buddha which were stored in this stupa, and that is why these stupas are very much significant for Buddhism. A casket containing these relics is placed at the base of the dome. So there is a casket which contains these relics, and then this casket was placed at the base of the dome. The foundation of the Sanchi Stupa was laid by Ashoka at Sanchi, about 45 km from Bhopal in Madhya Pradesh. There are 4 gateways in 4 directions. So he built 4 gateways representing 4 directions. They have carved panels depicting events from the life of Buddha and some tales from Jataka stories. So there were these carved panels which had depiction regarding the life of Buddha, as well as some tales from Jataka stories, which the Jataka as the source of Buddhism we have already studied in the previous chapter. So all these were depicted on those panels. Buddha is represented by symbols like the peepal tree, lotus or a wheel. The pillars are surmounted by capitals which contain sculptures of lions. So these pillars, they were surmounted. The capital was placed on these pillars, and these pillars contained the sculptures of lions. Now we will study the administration under Ashoka's, the administration under the Mauryan Empire. What kind of administration they followed? So it was Chandragupta Maurya, under the guidance of Chanakya, who laid the foundations of an elaborate system of administration. So this foundation of administration, or the foundation of this elaborate system of administration, was actually done by Chandragupta Maurya under the guidance of Chanakya, who was his advisor as well as prime minister. Chanakya wrote a book, Arthashastra, in which he describes the principles of politics and the art of administration. Chandragupta's son Bindusara retained the same system. Retained means he held back the same system that was started by his father Chandragupta Maurya, and Ashoka made some minor changes. After him, Bindusara, Ashoka, the son of Bindusara, he brought some small changes in the administration necessitated by the change of heart after the Kalinga War. He brought these minor changes because of his way of life that changed after the Kalinga War. That is why he brought some minor changes. So Mauryan administration is divided into 2 divisions. One is civil administration, another is military administration. So first is civil administration. The civil administration had 2 main divisions, the central government and the provincial government. First is the central government. The Mauryan government was centralized and was managed by several officers of different ranks. So central government is, the king was the supreme authority, and he was held by several officers holding different ranks. The king was the supreme authority and his throne was hereditary. He was also the supreme judge. Megasthenes, the Greek ambassador at the court of Chandragupta Maurya, in his book Indica, and Chanakya in the Arthashastra tell us about the Mauryan administration. So about this Mauryan administration, we come to know from these literary sources. They are Arthashastra written by Chanakya and Indica written by Megasthenes. So these are the literary sources from which we get the idea of the administration of Mauryan Empire. Ashoka brought about some changes in the administrative system. We already studied that because of his way of life changed after Kalinga War, he brought some minor changes in the administrative system of Chandragupta Maurya. He appointed Mahamatras, the governors, to look after the welfare of his subjects. At the central level, the king was assisted by the council of ministers. They are called the Mantri Parishad, headed by the prime minister. So at the central level, that is under central administration, the king was assisted by Mantri Parishad. This Mantri Parishad was headed by the prime minister. Each minister was responsible for his department. Every minister held some or the other department. So they were responsible for their own departments. The council of ministers included the chief pujari. So these were the council of ministers, included chief pujari of the state called Purohit. Then Senapatis, this Mantri Parishad, I am talking about, these are the Mantri Parishad who helped the king at the central level. So they were the Pujari, who was called the Purohit. He was the head of the, he was the religious head. Then Senapati, who advised the king on matters related to war and peace. Then the head treasurer called Sanidhata and Samaharta. They were the taxation experts. So these are the few examples of the Mantri Parishad at the central level. The other important officers were, so there were some other important officers also. They were the accountant general, one in charge of agriculture, superintendent of mines, superintendent of ports, controller of commerce, as well as the superintendent of weights and measures. So these were some other officers under the Mantri Parishad at the central level, and these were the important officers: Purohit, Senapati, Sanidhata, and Samharta. Now we will see the provincial government. Ashoka made alterations only in the central government and not in the provincial government. So we studied that Ashoka made some changes, and those changes were made only in the central government and not in the provincial government. During his grandfather's time, there were 4 provinces, and after the addition of Kalinga in Ashoka's time, there were 5 provinces. So during Chandragupta's time, that was during Ashoka's grandfather time, there were these 4 provinces only. But after the Kalinga war, Kalinga was added as the 5th province, and so there were total 5 provinces during the time of Ashoka. So these are the provinces along with their capitals mentioned here. Head of the province was called Kumar or Aryaputra. Every province was put under the in charge. He was called the Kumar or the Aryaputra. Only the princes were appointed to this position. So this position was completely held by the princes. During Ashoka's time, the Kumar was assisted by governor or Mahamatra. According to some rock and pillar edicts of Ashoka, besides the Mahamatra, other officers took active part in the administration of the provinces. So besides the Mahamatra, there were some other officers also who took active part in the administration of the provinces. So these were the officers. The names of some of the officers are mentioned here. They are Pradeshika, whose function was to collect tax. Rajuka, his performed the functions of modern day Tehsildar, or you can say him as a revenue officer. And the Yukta was the treasurer. Then next is the district administration. The provinces were divided into districts called Janapadas. So the central government was divided into provinces, and the provinces were further divided into districts called Janapadas. Their administration was looked after by Pradeshika, Rajuka, and Yukta. So these were the officers in charge of district administration: Pradeshika, Rajuka, and Yukta. Then administration of cities. Important cities, the capitals of provinces, as given earlier, had their own administrative system. So we already studied here the capitals of the provinces. So these are the capitals of the provinces: Patliputra, Takshila, Ujjain, Swarnagiri, Toshali. So they had different kind of administration. Since they were the capitals, so they had their own administrative system. The head of the city was called Nagardhyaksh. So the head of the cities, they were called the Nagardhyaksha. According to Megasthenes, the administration of Patliputra, the capital city of Mauryan Empire, was looked after by a committee of 30 members. So according to Megasthenes, from his book we come to know that the administration of Patliputra was actually the capital city of Mauryan Empire, that was looked by a committee which comprised of total 30 members. Then the revenue system. The land revenue was the chief source of income in the Mauryan Empire. It was 1/6 to 1/4 of the produce. So the land revenue was the chief source of income of the Mauryan Empire, and this land revenue varied according to the produce. So it varied from 1/6 to 1/4 according to the produce. 2 kinds of taxes were also mentioned in the edicts of Ashoka. They were Bali and Bhaga. So these were the 2 types of taxes that were mentioned in Ashokan edicts. Bhaga was levied on agricultural produce and the cattle at the rate of 1/6. So what was Bhaga? Bhaga was actually the agricultural produce, whatever was the agricultural production, whether it was rice, wheat, any kind of crops. So whatever was the agricultural production, and the cattle as well as the cattle. So on these things, the tax that was charged was called Bhaga, and it was 1/6 of the production. According to Vincent Smith and Samashastri, Bali was a religious tribute, and this Bali was a kind of religious tribute or religious tax. Then toll tax was imposed on articles. So these were the 2 important taxes, Bhaga and Bali. There were some other taxes also, like the toll tax was imposed on articles which were brought for sale. Taxes were levied on liquor shops and gambling houses. Some taxes were collected from forests and mines. From the revenue collected, the state provided various facilities. So, whatever was the tax collected, the amount of tax collected, so that was spent on welfare of the people. That was spent on construction of roads, irrigation, hospitals, and met other expenses of the state. Then the spy system. Chandragupta Maurya had a wide network of spies in his empire. There were spies against the spies, and on important matters, more than one agent was asked to collect information. So there was a vast network, wide network of spies. So there were spies, and they had spies against spies also. And if the matter was very important, then one agent was asked. Then more than one agent was asked to collect the information. The king was always kept informed of the working of the bureaucracy, the working of the administration, the working of the officers. It was every time informed to the king. Then the military administration. Chandragupta Maurya maintained a huge army consisting of infantry, cavalry, elephants, and chariots. So, according to Megasthenes, the Mauryan Empire consisted of 6 lakh infantry, 30,000 cavalry, and 9,000 war elephants. So, these were the numbers of infantry, cavalry, and war elephants in Mauryan army. According to another source, the Mauryas maintained 8,000 chariots. The chief weapons used were bows, arrows, shields, swords, etc. So these were the chief weapons used. The king was the commander-in-chief of the army. So he was the commander-in-chief of the army. The whole army was under a military commission of 30 members. This entire army, it was kept under this military commission, and this military commission comprised of 30 members. The Mauryans also had a well-led recruitment policy. So how the soldiers will be hired, how the soldiers will be recruited, so for that they had a very good recruitment policy. The soldiers were paid salary in cash. They were paid salary in cash, means money, not in kind. Kind means not in any kind of thing, but in cash. The Mauryan king had built forts at strategic places for safeguard and security of the empire. So they also built forts at strategic places, means the places which were under frequent attacks, or the places which had chances of any foreign invasion. So at those places these forts were constructed for the protection of the empire. Then Ashoka's Dhamma. After the Kalinga War, Ashoka became the people's king. He embraced Buddhism but did not impose it on his subjects. So after Kalinga War, as it was already told that he changed his way of life, he embraced Buddhism as his religion, but he never imposed it on his subjects. He wanted his subjects to follow such a dhamma that may be based on the unifying principles of all major religions of the world. So dhamma is not any kind of religion, but it was like a code of conduct which comprised of all the good principles of all the major religions of the world. The Dhamma, as described in Ashoka's edict, is not a religion or religious system, but it was a moral law, a common code of conduct, or an ethical order, which is a common meeting ground of all religions. So these were the principles of Ashoka's Dhamma: respect to elders and love to children, ahimsa or non-violence, good deeds or good karma could give happiness to man in the next birth. He taught people to respect all religions. He disapproved empty rituals. So these were the principles of Ashoka's Dhamma. Impact of Dhamma on Ashoka's imperial policy. So what were the impact? First is religious unity. People belonging to different religions followed their emperor's policy. So this Dhamma policy was followed by people belonging to every religion, and so there was religious unity. There was religious tolerance. All the religions, they unified and stayed together. Moral values. People under the influence of Dhamma started living a moral life. They started to follow all these moral values, all the principles, and so they started to live a moral life. Then end of crimes. The policy of ahimsa did have a great moral impact on the people. Since Ashoka's policy was ahimsa, not to injure or kill anybody, so there were the end of crimes. It had a great moral impact on the people. The crimes and other such activities almost came to an end. Then public welfare. With the policy of conquest and wars having come to an end, Ashoka's Dhamma helped officials to undertake public welfare and public work schemes. So they have given up poor, they have no what to do, no conquest to make. So that is why they devoted their time and attention towards public welfare and public work schemes. This resulted in prosperity and helped people to lead a peaceful life.